Okay, guys, um, Brian here again, and doing day number 2 of my 12 days of wet shaving. And so yesterday I talked, or my last episode, I talked about um, razors. And when you're first getting into wet shaving, at least for me, trying to narrow down what razor to start with and whatnot was kind of a bit of a challenge. And so I talked a little bit about that in the first episode. Now, in this episode, I want to talk to you about brushes. Brushes are probably at least for me, when I was getting into traditional wet shaving, it was the area that I at least understood. At least I have a basic understanding with regards to a razor, and kind of how it functions. Even though for many, many years, I used the multi-bladed Mach 3s or whatever Gillette was selling, and I understood soaps, or at least cream, shaving cream. I kind of got that, but a brush is something that I've never used until I started traditionally wet shaving. And so I wanted to talk just a little bit about and give you an understanding as far as the different options that are out there. Brushes are broken down really into about, I would say, 4 or 5 categories, depending on how you look at it. You have badger hair brushes, and there's many different types of badger hair brushes. You have boar brushes. You have synthetic brushes. You have horsehair brushes, and you have mixed brushes. So in the area of badger brushes, because that's where a lot of people, when they think about shaving brushes, that's what they think about. They think about the badger hair brushes, and there are tons and tons in that space, in the badger space. There are tons and tons of variety. There's different types of hair from the badger, and and I'm not going to get into all of that, but supposedly the different style hairs will provide a slightly different feel and a slightly different performance. One of the things that I found, just like everything else in wet shaving, is so much of this is personal preference. So you've got some guys that absolutely love badgers. You've got some guys that absolutely love boars. You've got some guys that love synthetics. A lot of this is just so much personal preference. But in that badger hair space, again, you have the different types of silver tips and pure mountain badger and just so many different things. When you get into this, you can start by buying a $300 plus brush. Marfin makes some beautiful brushes that are absolutely gorgeous and are over $300 a piece. But you don't have to start there. And while someday I would absolutely love to own one, not even for performance, but just because of the way they look so awesome. But I started out with an absolute El Cheapo Escali Badger brush. 2 years ago, I got this brush, and this was my starting point. This is what I started with, and it's absolutely nothing wrong with this. Nothing wrong with starting with an El Cheapo brush like this for your badger. This actually works very nice. Nice soft tips. Still got some really nice backbone to it, and so this is definitely a great starting point. And while I'm talking about kind of tips and softness and whatnot, backbone, all of that kind of stuff, what you'll find in brushes is that we'll talk about the loft, which has to do with basically how high the hair sticks up out of the handle, and they'll talk about the size from it's a 22 millimeter, whatever. That has to do with about how big around, I believe it's at the base, how big around the knot is here. And then you'll get some, that the hairs are more densely packed into the brush. And again, all of this just affects the performance slightly differently for different people. So when we talk about backbone has to do with how much stiffness there is in the brush. And when you're using the brush, again, how much resistance in what, again, it's just the stiffness when you're pushing, how much pressure you have to kind of put against it to get it to display. This has pretty good backbone. It's not the most backbone that I have, but this has fairly good backbone. Now, this brush here that I have is, you can see it just doesn't, even you can see it just splays a lot easier. And when this brush is wet, this is very, very floppy. Is kind of how I would describe this. It doesn't have as much backbone as what this Ascali brush has. Now, when you're getting into brushes, another thing that you'll find is that you can find brushes like this. Again, this is a cheap Ascali. I got it on Amazon. There are other name brand brushes like Simogs, which are Boar. We'll talk about those a little bit, mainly Boar. Trying to think some of Seville, Row, trying to think some other ones. But anyhow, name brand brushes. The other thing that you will find is that you can get custom brushes. And there are plenty of guys on the web who make custom brushes with different types of knots in them. So, you know, again, it's just, we live in the golden age of wet shaving where there's just so many choices. So this, again, is just a off-the-shelf Amazon brush. The one I was showing you here is actually a custom brush that is got a badger hair knot in it. I don't exactly remember what knot this is, to be honest with you. But this is made by a guy out of the UK by the name of Rod Neep. And he actually he actually bought this hand-carved lion head piece of stone from villagers in Kenya, and he turned it into shaving brushes. And what he does is he actually works with those villagers. He buys them at a fair price, turns things like this, and this was a limited edition. I don't think he's got any more of these, but turns them into brushes, and then the profit he turns around and invests back into the village there. So it was a great cause. But you can get this is just an example of what you can get in the custom space. And now, I don't use this brush a lot for a number of reasons. Number one, well, it actually is surprisingly got a nice grip on it just because of the way the head is built. It is a little bit floppy for me, and I just have other brushes that I like. But I still absolutely am very, very happy to have this in my den. Every time I use it, I get all kinds of compliments on it. But there are guys like, trying to think of some of the guys, I think Chad Irish is making them. Matthew Martin, I think, is another guy. Just so many different guys out there. I don't want to leave anybody out. Rod Neep, again, who make custom brushes out of wood, out of stone, out of metal. And so many options. And then you can choose what kind of knot you want in it, whether or not you want a badger or a boar or a mixed or a synthetic. But anyhow, getting back to this, I've digressed a little bit. Badger. The next space is Boar. And Simogs and Omegas are kind of the two, I guess you would say, most popular or most well-known makers of Boar brushes. I happen to have, this is my 1438, absolutely love this brush. And Boar is a great, great way to get into wet shaving because it's a fairly cheap price point. This was under 20 bucks, I believe it's $17. And once you get a Boar brush broken in, the tips of it are just as soft to me as my badger, and there's nice backbone into it. And so we'll talk about this in another episode with regards to using different brushes for different soaps. But ones with this here's got really nice backbone, and so with my harder soaps, this is always my go-to brush. Where I might use my Ascali a little bit more with creams and softer soaps, just because it's going to be easier to load those. And a harder soap, it's going to be easier to load with a Boar brush like this. It's got really nice backbone. Now, I also said about mixed brushes. This happens to be a Simog Owners Club 2012. I received this from Busta, aka El Cablito. And this is really nice because this has got really tons and tons of backbone. But this is also, it's a mixed badger and Boar. Nice soft tips. But this actually works very well still with the hard soaps and with the creams as well. I mean, not that you can't use this with the creams, you can. But this works well, and it's really a multi-purpose brush. And I just absolutely love this brush. A little bit more density in the knot you can see there than we would say with my my 1438 Boar. A little more density there in the knot. You can just see a little bit finer or more packed with hairs. But this is another great, you know, again, you kind of get the best of both worlds with the badger and the Boar. Now, there are horsehair brushes. I don't have any horsehair brushes, but that's definitely another option, and some guys really, really like them, and they provide a little bit of a different feel from my understanding. One of the things that you'll also find as well when you get into traditional wet shaving, all of these brushes that I have were fairly either new, like I bought this brand new. I bought the Ascali brand new. The Rod Neep was brand new. This one here from that I got from Busta was a used brush, but it's still a modern brush. But you can also get vintage brushes. Now, I have one here. This is not very, very old. This is a vintage brush from, when I say vintage, I'm wanting to say from maybe the 80s. 80s, and you can get, if you really want to talk true vintage, in antique shops and whatnot, you can get Everetti's and stuff from way back in the day, of ones with wooden handles and whatnot. And there are a lot of guys that restore those. Some of them will use the knot that came with it, and some guys will put a new knot in an old handle. So again, in the brush space, just a lot of different options. But my recommendation, if I were coming into wet shaving, would be to just start with a simple brush. And really, well, I started with a Ascali. If I were coming into wet shaving today, my recommendation, or what I would want to start with, would actually be this Semogue 1438. Now, there are other versions of the Semogue that guys swear by, the 620. There's another one, maybe it might be an 820, I don't remember exactly. But I actually would, this is where I personally would start. But again, you don't have to spend, the point being, you don't have to spend a lot of money on a brush to get started with traditional wet shaving. Both of these, great entry brushes, and they are both under 20 bucks. So hopefully this is helpful, trying to help you understand a little bit about brushes and the differences between them. I don't want to go in depth into everything. I'm not by no means an expert on this. This is just what I have come to understand and kind of what works for me. And so hopefully this will be helpful to you. Brushes are so much like anything else in traditional wet shaving, personal preference. And you're going to have some guys. Oh, one thing I didn't talk about were synthetics. I meant to talk about synthetics, and I don't want to leave those out. Right now, the Plasan synthetic is getting a lot of popular reviews. A lot of guys loving that brush. I haven't tried it yet, but synthetic hair brushes are definitely another option in this space. I know Whip Dog makes one. And there are also some guys that are making custom brushes with Plasan-esque. Actually, some guys swear by it and say it's better than the Plasan knot. But again, those are just options that are out there, and all great options. The Plasan synthetic is, I think, $30. So again, you don't have to spend big money to get started in wet shaving. You can spend all the money you want, but you can get a great brush for not a lot of money, and to get started into the hobby. And so, I would just really, again, my recommendation is going to be to start here. There are other guys that might say, no, you want to start with the Plasan synthetic or whatnot. But again, this is just my opinion. This is where I would start. I would start with a Boar, a Semogue I like. There are some guys that swear by the Omegas. But just, this is a great, great brush, and for not a lot of money. And so that's my spiel on my 12 days of shaving with regards to brushes. And we'll talk a little bit more about brushes when we get into lathering and face lathering versus bowl lathering, and kind of what the benefits are of using different brushes for each. Until then, this is Brian saying have a great day, everybody.